In this video, we'll learn the importance as well as the function of channels and shaders here inside of MARI. Alright, so this is where we left off in the previous video. And, when you're creating a project texture here inside of MARI, you're not going to get very far with just a single channel. If you remember when I created this particular project, we added a single channel. We added a color channel. Now, remember, the purpose of channels inside of MARI is to hold texture information. So we can put in this particular channel, we've labeled it color. So that tells me that we're going to put color information inside this particular channel. And that's great. So, but color information isn't the only information we need texture-wise to communicate a realistic surface. So if you look at, for example, her skin, or the areas that you would assume are her skin, and how the highlights are being shown on those, versus the way those highlights are appearing on something like this bandana that's around her neck, that doesn't feel right because it's the exact same. So when you're rendering out textures, more than likely, in order to create realistic surfaces, you're going to need a number of different types of texture maps. You'll need, obviously, a color map, but more than likely you'll need things like specular maps, roughness maps. You may even have things like normal maps or displacement maps. You may have subsurface scattering to consider. So these are all things that happen over the course of a render when you're dealing with textures. Now, inside of MARI, we can texture all we want to on this color channel, and we can look at it here just fine. As a matter of fact, if we were to come over to the shaders palette here, you'll see here that currently I have the current channel visible. So we're looking at all of the information on the current channel with the lighting information that we've specified. And we have some basic input controls for diffuse, specular, and specular roughness. Now this is going to control the entire channel. But again, for a single texture channel. Now, what we need in order to really start to create some beautiful textures and realistic surfaces here inside of MARI is we need to enlist the help of a shader. So in MARI, a shader's purpose is to render out multiple texture channels at the same time right here on our canvas. Let me go ahead and show you how we do that. I'll come over here and we can simply click on this little button right here inside of our shaders palette. And you'll notice that there are a number of different types of shaders available to us. Several of these you may recognize. Some of these are software specific or plugin specific. But we have some basic shaders like Fongs, Torrents, Beckman, or Blends. Now, if you get further down this list, you're going to start seeing some things that might look specific to maybe a game engine in Unreal, or a rendering plugin like Arnold with this AI standard, or V-Ray with the V-Ray material, or even Redshift. And you can see we have the Redshift architectural material. So at this point, we need to consider where our textures are going to be sent to. If they're going to something like Arnold, then we may want to use an Arnold shader here. So we're creating the correct maps that can plug into that shader once the textures are being rendered. The same goes for really any of these. Now, we could choose this BRDF shader right here. Now, this is MARI's standard physically based shader. This is not specific to a software package outside of MARI, but this will give us a very nice physically based result. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this one for right now. We'll go ahead and select the BRDF shader. And as soon as I do, you'll notice here some things are changing on my canvas. But also down here, we now have a number of different inputs that are available to us. Now, the problem we're seeing here, we have obviously a number of different checkerboard patterns. The problem we're seeing here is that for the color, this very first input, it's set to current channel. If we came over here to channels, we want to make sure we have that selected. And you can see here that it's still not giving us any kind of result. Let's come in here and let's actually specify by clicking on current channel. And we'll tell MARI that for the diffuse color input, we want to use the color channel. And there we go. Now we have our color channel available to us. Now, if you remember way back when we created this project, the default fill color for that color channel was kind of a neutral gray. And that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at that neutral gray. But now that we have this BRDF shader created, we can begin to create additional channels that can plug into inputs like the specular color, maybe the glossiness, the reflectance, the ambient occlusion, whatever the case may be. Now, just so you'll know, inside of MARI's BRDF shader, it lists glossiness here. Now, glossiness and roughness are essentially the exact opposite of one another. So we could actually create a roughness map and simply plug it into the glossiness and then click this little button right here, which will invert it. So you can see here it actually had an effect on the roughness right now on our mesh. So let's begin creating some channels here. We can do this a few different ways. Let's go ahead and say we want to create a specular color channel. Okay, so we can come over to the channels palette, obviously. We can come in and create a channel right here. And we can come in and give it a name. So let's just maybe call this spec. Euler. There we go. And we can give it a size. Now, important thing to remember, this size we're specifying here is per patch. So remember, we have a number of different texture patches in this asset. So we're going to give them all by default a resolution of 2K. Now we can come in here and specify a bit depth for this, or a file space if we so chose, as well as we have some color space options here that are available to us. Here in just a couple of videos, we're going to learn about color management here inside of MARI, and we're going to touch more on these color space options. But for right now, let's just leave these set to the defaults. And I'm going to go ahead and just click OK on this. Now, by creating this channel here inside the Channels palette, it's not connecting this channel to the appropriate input on our shader. So if we came over to our Shaders palette, you'll notice our specular color still has no connection made here. Let's just drop this down and select the specular channel there. And there we go. You noticed a small shift in the highlights here, as we're probably not having quite as much specularity calculated for the mesh based on that default color. So if we came over here, let's go ahead and look at another way we can create a channel. So let's say we wanted a roughness channel, for example. Okay, well, we're going to use the glossiness input in the case of the BRDF. And we'll go ahead and just click on that little button there, which will invert the connection here. But I'm also going to come in and I'm going to click on that button there, which is going to add a channel. The exact same dialog that we saw before. Now, the only difference here, let's just go ahead and drop this down, and I'm going to choose, looks like roughness isn't in my list, so we'll go ahead and just call this roughness. That's just the most recently used channel names, and when you drop that down, and we'll go ahead and create this channel. Notice what happens. As soon as I hit OK, MARI creates the channel and it plugs it into that glossiness input there. So now we have a connection made. So when you're creating channels, you can do that ahead of time, absolutely, over here in the Channels palette, before you've ever created a shader. But 9 times out of 10, when I'm working on a new project, I'll come in and I'll create my shader first, and I'll just come in here and start creating channels for texture information. All right, great. Now, before we wrap this video up, I do want to scroll down inside our Shaders palette here. And notice here that there are a lot of additional parameters available to us in the case of the BRDF. Now, these are going to be different, as well as the inputs will be different depending on which of these shaders that you've created here. But these are the options for the BRDF. We have kind of the total glossiness, specular, diffuse, ambient occlusion. We even have some displacement options here, as well as some bump options. Now, up here above, you see that my BRDF is selected. This is really important to remember because this is what we're seeing here on the canvas. We're looking at the result of the BRDF and all of the channel inputs that it's calculating. Now, we can come in at any time and select, well, maybe we just want to view what's on the currently selected channel. That's where we can come in and select this guy. And you can see we're looking at just the current channel, which in this case is the roughness. So we can come over here and select the color. And it just so happens they all have kind of a gray color filling them right now, but that's what this option here does. Now, we can actually come over here and use these buttons here as well. So watch what happens when I click on this button. Right now we're looking at the current layer, and below We can look at only the current layer or only the current paint target. Now these last three options will make a little bit more sense once we learn about layers here inside of MARI. But it's really important to keep in mind that we do have control over what we're looking at on MARI's canvas when we have multiple channels and maybe even a shader involved. Alright, great. So in this video, we've learned the difference between channels and shaders here inside of MARI.